ask them for something.
We're good? All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody, to the school board study session of the Board of Education. I'd like to start tonight with our purpose and agenda, and I will turn that over to Superintendent Stallo.
Excellent. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Our purpose when we have study sessions always is to ensure that we share information, build trust, and to make sure that board members have all of the information they need, questions clarified in order for them to make wise and efficient decisions at the board table. This evening, we'll start with a very quick review of our mid-year district goals. And from there, we'll get an update. Part of your role as a board is that operation of oversight. So strategic direction number 6 will just give you an update. No action is needed this evening, but we want to let you know where we are. We also have some budget information that Executive Director Sink will share with us. And we have lots of policy information that we have this evening as well.
All right, thank you. And I do want to make a note in terms of agenda this evening for all board members. As you know from your email, we have had to remove the energy report, which will be rescheduled due to COVID issues, and the Safe Learning Plan update. Just to touch base, I know you all received this in your packet, but we start every school board study session reviewing our working document. And just a reminder, our board priority work is always aligned to our strategic directions. So this evening, we will be discussing several policies which are on our final read and will come forward for a vote at the February 7th meeting. And there will be 2 new policies as well. So we will be working on cycles in the policies of 400, 700, 800, and policy 213 related to board committees. In terms of our operational oversight role, we will be talking about strategic direction number 6 tonight, specifically stakeholder engagement, as well as number 2, fiscal accountability, and we'll be looking at budget parameters going forward. And then we'll also, under superintendent relations, be discussing the timeline of the superintendent review and be getting our mid-year update from Dr. Stallo. All right, I'm going to pass it back to you now.
Excellent. Christy, could I get you to advance the slides? I'm sorry I didn't ask you to do that sooner on the presentation. Thank you. So board members, it's always this time of the year, the end of January, that we come forward and provide you just a brief update on where we are with our mid-year goals. Part of, and tonight's a good example of that, as Christy will be sharing some of our strategic direction work from strategic direction number 6. But we always want to be sure that we remind you of our district system of continuous improvement as part of the superintendent evaluation. And again, I always think of the mid-year review and update certainly as part of my evaluation, but it really is about the team and the amazing work that folks in all corners of this district do around that. So we can go ahead to the next slide. And this is the cycle that you've seen many times. It is our system of continuous improvement that outlines the collective work we do in a shared leadership model. We know that all staff are part of continuous improvement, and it's important that they see their role in helping to advance our mission and to help to achieve department and school improvement plans. Our admin team has reported this year even a deeper commitment to this process around shared leadership, and they feel like we're really getting in a place where our stakeholders are feeling engaged and a part of the work, and different teams have spoken about that in different ways. Well, this is a round circle. It certainly isn't sequential. We just want to point it out as you look at the very top. It really is those board goals aligned to our strategic plan, our district scorecard. From there in the orange, it's the strategic directions, those 6 areas on the right side of our strategic plan. That is really our strategies and our improvement efforts lie. We believe that if we achieve those things, that mission will come to life for us. We've got teams across the district on each one of those. And then our department and school improvement plans, again, where our teams help us to advance our work. Our teachers on their collaborative learning teams, as well as the professional learning and PD that we do as all staff, are an important part of our work. And ultimately, we want to get to the place where students are really tracking and aligning their own data through their personalized learning work. So again, the next slide is that strategic plan, which is, as you know, community created, board approved. It really helps outline why we exist, the work that we do, the values that we hold dear, and the goals and the vision of which we hope that we are to become. The next slide is exactly what Chair Nelson was just referencing. This is the board agenda, the year of board agenda and working document. And you've got 5 primary areas that you take a look at, and all of our agendas are aligned to that to make sure that you're providing the governance role that is so important to the work that you do. Next slide is a placeholder for that district scorecard, and again, the operational plan, the priority work. I think there's another picture in there as well, and then we'll get to the actual scorecard. This is the identification of those indicators that we want to track at a district level. There's a lot of other data that we take a look at, and our buildings and our departments are looking at, but this is that district data aligned to those strategic directions, especially that on the first page. We see a lot of that aligned also to our world's best workforce and the state accountability measures. But the purpose of the balanced scorecard is to really show that it is more than just the student achievement data that we're looking and tracking. In February, Chrislyn Goodman will come forward and share some of that interim student achievement data. So you can go to the next slide, Christy. Again, those are the rest of the metrics that we use aligned to each of our strategic directions, really looking at a lot of the social and emotional outcomes are from those stakeholder surveys. Christy's going to be presenting this evening on some work that we've done around that survey and stakeholder engagement work as well. Again, those metrics align to that priority work that we have. In the next slide, and oftentimes whenever I show the strategic plan, one side is the strategic plan, but the back side I think is really important for people to understand what are those district goal areas that we're focusing on under each of those strategic directions. And that's that place that we have the multiple teams that we have work on. Also on this, if you remember, the blue area after each of those goals, those are the strategies, and that's where we align to the reimagine education work that AMSD and Metro Districts have been engaged in for about the last 5 years. The next slide is really a placeholder to the report that's in your packet, which is the summary of progress that's been made to date in each of those areas. And again, that is collective work. Our team, we have core administrators leading each of those teams. And then we have staff, in some cases students, in some cases parents also helping to lead some of that work through our advisory councils and other kinds of groups like that. I did want to call out, in addition, and you'll see this in the report, in addition to the priority work, I think there's 3 primary areas that we've also prioritized and focused much of our time this year. Certainly COVID-19, maintaining that safe learning plan and continuing to meet on a weekly basis, continuing to review data and make the best decisions we possibly can for the safety and the educational plan for our students has been enormous work, continued into almost 2 years now. So that's beyond even the priority work that we established last May. Additionally, we have had some significant changes in district leadership and organizational changes, which has just had different teams doing some different roles and working together in different ways. And certainly when you reduce administrative positions, you add to everybody else's plate. And that is something that we've experienced. Certainly the high school has experienced this year, and we're continuing to help support each other and figure out how to share those duties, because it isn't as though the work went away. And we've had to realign some things. And then lastly, just again, acknowledging the time commitment that we've spent throughout the last year and a half, but certainly since the summer into the fall on the technology levy and making sure that we provided information to community members so that they had information in order to make the vote that they wanted to make on that. But again, all of these things are in addition to both the continuity of operations as well as district goals and priority work. So I just want to acknowledge that. And again, thank my team who have continued to do very, very, very heavy lifting and a very, very lean team over the last couple of years. Just wanted to just very quickly share a little bit more about the school continuous improvement plans and the department continuous improvement plans. This is also the time of the year where I meet with all of the principals as well as with directors and executive directors, and we take a look at where we are, where they are, and their departments are with their department and school improvement plans. We review data and reflect on what are the additional steps that need to happen, what's working, what's not working. Really excited. We're doing something a little bit different this year with our school continuous improvement plans. The directors in the Division of Learning, Achievement, and Innovation are also going to be joining me on the first part of those reviews with principals because those are the directors who support the work and help lead the work around the goals. We want to be sure that principals feel that support and have accessibility to all of us to both review data and to determine what they need as they determine next steps for their schools. And just as a review, in these mid-year meetings, the school area, the goal areas in each of our buildings, everyone has a goal around relationships and social emotional learning, around educational equity and excellence, reading, math, and science, and the high school also has that high school graduation rate. And I actually saw this last week when I was at Five Hawks, and I know buildings do this in different ways, but I was so impressed that not only are these SCIP goals part of what the BILT teams, the Building Instructional Leadership teams do, and all staff work around, but at Five Hawks, they had their goals and the action steps around those goals on posters around the school so that the students and staff and anybody who comes into the schools can see what that relationship action steps are, what those reading action steps are. So like I said, I just saw that on Thursday when I visited Five Hawks and wanted to be sure to showcase. I think it just says a lot about a culture of continuous improvement. It's not about just creating a school improvement plan, but it's a culture of helping people know what those goals are and what the work is that everyone is trying to jointly achieve. And then once we'll get through these mid-years, we'll review data, we'll determine where we need to go in different directions and where we need to make adjustments or where we need to continue the work that we have started and implement things with fidelity. And then in May, actually it's more April-ish, we analyze the data, the goal progress, and we'll come back to you with an end of the year report. And also, as we work with advisory councils, as we work with our priority work team, and certainly getting input from you, make recommendations as we look to district goals and priority work for next year.
Thank you. That's a very quick, big picture view of all the work being done. We have supplemental materials in our board book. And as you've called out, I'd like to thank you not only for your leadership at this point, but all of the staff that has worked with you, because indeed things have changed in terms of the staffing structure and in terms of the extra challenges that have been faced the last 2 years. We're going to move on to the next item, just to review a little bit the superintendent evaluation timeline for all of us. Of course, right now we're at January 24th with the mid-year report, so I encourage everyone, if you didn't get time, to go through and read more of the specifics provided to us in our packet. And then in April, the superintendent will be providing us with information related to her district goals for all of us to look at. And I think all of us have now been through the evaluation process at least once. And you might recall Dr. Stallo tends to put together a very thick packet of materials. And I would say to her and to us, just a reminder that she's updating us continually at board meetings and at study sessions and in her newsletters. And so for your sake, you don't have to be quite as extensive on that because you are continually giving us that information. And I'd just like to remind us as we're thinking about looking ahead to that evaluation process that we will do, because of course that's one of our responsibilities as a school board, is to evaluate our superintendent, that MSBA really looks at the evaluation as part of a year-long effective dialogue between a superintendent and her board. So in other words, she's continually giving us information through board reports, through reports from her administrative team, or from teachers or building representatives. We receive a weekly newsletter in which she outlines not only her daily schedule, but when she has been to special events, when she has been involved in community organizations, for example, the Rotary, and her professional associations that she participates in. So we actually get a weekly snapshot of where you've been and how you've been engaged and involved. And that dialogue goes two ways. So while she's continually updating us on the work, it's a good chance for us right now at mid-year to remember it's also our job to continually be giving you feedback, to not wait for April to go through a checklist and fill out concerns or praise either way. So I'd like to encourage all of you to remember to maintain your at least monthly meetings with Dr. Stallo. Let her know where things are going well. Let her know where you have questions. Let's keep the dialogue effective going forward. MSBA also reminds us all that our district and our students do better when a superintendent is successful. And the board has the role of helping our superintendent be successful. So what resources does she need? Where do we see the goals that need more attention? And how can we support that going forward? So let's just keep that in mind as we look forward to April. And when we fill out that evaluation form, none of it should be a surprise at that point. It should just be a more formal exploration of what we've been sharing and exchanging all year long. And also I wanted to let the board know that at last year evaluation time, the executive team worked with Jim Quorum a little bit to consider whether or not the format we currently use for the superintendent evaluation is the most helpful and the most streamlined that it could be. It's a pretty intensive document. A lot of it can be repetitive from what's shared throughout the year. And we were at the end of a 3-year contract, so it did not make sense to make a change to the evaluation in the final year of a contract. She's starting year 1 now, so now the executive team will probably look again and work with Jim to see if there are any improvements to the process that we can make in a way that is most helpful to her leadership, to her team, to us for sharing what we see or need or can offer, and if there's a more streamlined way to do it, so we're not duplicating a lot of extra efforts. So we will just look forward to that. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up we are going to be looking at strategic direction number 6, engaging students, parents, families, and community to strengthen a culture of respect and inclusion. Christy Mussman will be presenting.
Okay, good evening, Chair Nelson, members of the board, Dr. Stallo. It's my pleasure to provide you with an update on Strategic Direction 6. As Dr. Stallo indicated earlier this evening, when we look at our strategic directions, we are steeped in them throughout the school year. And at the beginning of the school year, or actually even last summer, a team looked at Strategic Direction 6 particularly through the lens of how can we improve our annual stakeholder surveys. So I will let you brief you on what we've been doing in that area. You've seen this document once already. I think you see it every single meeting. But again, this is Strategic Direction 6 that I'm talking about tonight, and it's about engaging students, parents, families, and community to strengthen a culture of respect and inclusion. And as we talk about shared leadership and the continuous improvement model, we always bring a committee together to have lots of perspectives involved. This particular committee is the survey committee that has worked on the annual stakeholder surveys throughout the last several years. So we felt it was important to bring them together, along with a few new faces too, to get some perspective about how we want to take our surveys to the next level. So the first step is to take an inventory of what our current surveys are. You're very familiar, I know, with the Morris Leatherman Community Stakeholder Surveys. Those are the ones that we do every other year where Peter Leatherman comes in and presents results. The committee felt very emphatically that we want to keep moving with those surveys. They're very valuable to us. So we'd like to continue on an every other year cycle. Then we also looked at the annual staff, student, parent, and surveys conducted every spring. Those we've been doing since 2017. And then we also do the Minnesota Student Survey. This is a requirement by the Minnesota Department of Education that's done every 3 years for certain grade levels. And 2022 is another student survey year that we'll be doing this spring. So as we looked at our goals and what we wanted to accomplish surrounding moving forward with advancing our annual stakeholder surveys, we really talked about having that outside expertise, a firm that could maybe help us in having that unbiased outside source that is able to have, they know how to write scientific questions, they're nationally normed, they know best practice, they're experts at analyzing results, and we really thought that could bring our surveys to the next level. So we set a timeline as follows. As you can see, as part of this timeline, we decided to do a request for proposals process so that we could have a level playing field for evaluation of the different vendors. That we began in November. We got all the proposals in, we interviewed our top finalists, and we conducted reference checks. And then the committee met just a short time ago to make recommendations and determine next steps. As we put together the RFPs, similar to the goals I outlined earlier, we wanted to make sure that all of the vendors who were submitting an RFP really understood what our goals were. One of the biggest objectives that we had as a committee is we really wanted to look for firms that had experience with public education clients. And it would be really great if we could find someone who's familiar with strategic planning and district continuous improvement so that when we have the results analyzed in the survey, we can really align those to our strategic plan and our goals and really have a firm understanding of what actionable next steps could be for our district and at the school level. When we got the proposals back, there were 4 that we really felt checked most of the boxes. So the ones that you see in purple there are the ones that we decided to go forward and interview. So Thought Exchange, Search, K-12 Insight, and Studer, and they're all just a little bit different. So it was a very interesting interview process. In the end, we decided that Studer Education really, we unanimously felt like they were the ones that really would best meet our needs. They are, they have scientific, nationally normed questions that they can help us with. They understand strategic planning process. They, during the interview, they had even looked at ours a little bit already, and so we really felt like they understood where we've been and where we're going. They do online survey administration. They also do data analysis and are able to really help us with not only helping us understand what we're doing well, but how we can get better and set goals for ourselves moving forward. So for the next steps, we are going to be entering into a contract agreement for the next school year. And the reason being is this is usually about the time when we have our questions kind of starting to get in place already for the spring. We didn't want to rush things too much just because we're entering into a pretty big relationship here and it's a big process. So the committee felt it was a good idea to move forward with doing our own survey this spring. Probably a little bit scaled back survey, and then we're going to be meeting with Studer actually this Friday to start talking about our timeline, and then we'll have really nice time to make sure we're doing this with fidelity moving forward. So that's a quick overview. Dr. Stahl, I know you've been involved. Maybe you want to add something too.
I think probably the piece that the committee was most impressed with Studer is it was more than just a survey. Some of the other groups really, their product is the survey piece, but we felt that the relationship with Studer would help us to strengthen our continuous improvement efforts and to look at some of the options and some of the products that they use beyond just the annual survey. I know pulsing surveys are some of those smaller in between to get some input on specific topics that might be of interest. They've been working with especially Northfield schools on some of that. So we just feel like they're going to help us not just with the surveys, but really help elevate some of our continuous improvement efforts.
Any comments or questions? Stacy?
Just, I had a question on engagement, like getting people to feel, engaged with the survey, other avenues. Do they have, like, I've seen some online stuff, like live action kind of stuff, are they suggesting other things? I mean, I guess I don't know what's all out there, but I just know there's some different ways to do it.
There's lots of different ways to go about it. Studer mostly does online, and they have ways to optimize response rates to make sure they're getting the right scientific sampling. Other vendors that we looked at were like, I think maybe what you're talking about is like thought exchange, where it's those ideas that kind
Maybe
of rise to the
yeah.
top, and they,
Yeah.
super interesting, cool approach to it. And the committee was really interested in it, but it doesn't really check all the boxes of our objectives. It'd be really great, like if you had, for example, if you're going through an attendance boundary process, or you have like one issue or topic that you wanted to get ideas on. So it was just a little bit out of the scope of what we were looking for.
But so what is Studer, like, is it your typical online survey? I mean, is that?
They do that. They also offer help with focus groups if you wanted to go down that route. But yeah, they're mostly online surveys, and we're gonna learn a lot more this Friday with them.
Well, and that was one of the things, I'm glad you asked that, one of the things that, the surveys that we've been using, I think have served us very, very well. We took questions from a lot of different surveys, and we don't have comparable data in some regards, so this is going to be much better, but they've served us well. We've implemented well. We've used the data. You can see on skip goals, they use the data to set some of those goals. It's incredibly time intensive, especially for Christy and for Chrislyn Goodman. What we're really hoping is by getting some support here, Chrislyn can continue to do some of the focus groups to really, take some of this data and then learn more in those smaller focus groups. So, yeah, we're excited to meet on Friday to see what, the next couple of years can look like and how they can help us be better.
Well, and I'll just say one thing just from a historical, I mean, it had been pretty random that we had done surveys up until prior to your coming. So I think the consistency, even, with what we've done, I commend everybody on that, just because I think it's been helpful, especially, these last few years with just engagement and everything, to really see where the patterns are. And I think it validates, because a lot of times we hear historical, anecdotal, but to have data behind it, I think is very helpful. So I'm encouraged that we're trying something new. I think that's great, but I think it's good that we've built the case up until now. So that's my 2 cents.
Question, is Studer going to help us phrase the questions
Yeah,
appropriately for
Yep.
the population samples that are chosen?
Yeah, I know that they talked about questions that they have tested in the field, and they have nationally normed questions. So when I think about that, it makes me think about when Peter Leatherman comes here and he presents, like we can analyze the results and set goals, and that's worked really well. But when Peter comes and presents those, he's able to show how we compare, to other school districts. And I think that's really valuable to set goals. So I think that's going to be really beneficial to us.
and even, Mary, what we've done in the past, we've had some themes that we want to ask about, but we've known we need to word them a little different with elementary students and with secondary students. But, so yes, they have banks of questions, and I think those meetings will be, what is it we want to find out? And we'll be asking them, when you look at social emotional learning, or when you look at school safety, what are the questions that you use, so that we've got some of that comparable data as well.
So are they going to be, are we hiring Studer to do primarily community level, or are they going to be doing also internal or other type of, when you mentioned focus groups, are you talking about maybe surveys for staff too, as well as parents only, or the whole community? Do they have a
Right.
limit? I
We
mean, do they have
current-
a scope with
Yep,
regards
yep,
to
we
that?
currently, what we asked for in that RFP is we currently do annual student, staff, and parent surveys. The community one that Morris Leatherman does is really more of that community one that will maintain that still every 2 years, because that's how we make sure that we get a broader scope other than just our parents. But yeah, they'll be helping us with staff, parent, and student. So we'll maintain, to Stacy's point, we'll maintain what we have been doing.
Okay, and you had a slide up, if you could go back to the original, there, yeah, what is complete environmental scan of the strategic plan? What was meant by that?
I think what they mean is they want to see what we've been doing with our strategic planning process, and sort of what's behind that one page. What are we working on at the school and district level? I think they just want to see where we've been and where we're going so that they can help us with questions moving forward.
It's kind of been one of the processes, we created a lot of processes as I came in, both with the stakeholder survey, as well as that whole circle of continuous improvement that you just saw, the scorecard. That's something I'm very excited to get some expertise around, because again, we've taken it and we've said, okay, looking at our strategic directions and our priority work, what are the best metrics that we believe are available to use to measure our success? And again, I think we're doing really well on that, and I think they're going to help elevate us to the next level because they've worked with other districts who have done this. So I think they're just going to help us get better with those efforts so that we know that we're measuring the things that really matter and help us move student achievement and efficiencies of systems forward.
Great. Any other comments or questions while Christie's here?
I just have a question. I'm assuming it's an annual contract.
Yeah, I think this one might be 2-year.
Okay,
We haven't signed a contract with them yet, but
okay.
yeah.
One of the things, and again, some of it's pace, especially right now, because there's a lot of areas that we know that they can help us with, and we don't want to do too much too fast.
Yeah.
So when we meet with them on Friday, that's going to be one of the questions is, what could the next 2 years look like? Certainly that annual survey every year, but in terms of leadership development and continuous improvement development, does it make more sense to go over 2 years rather than trying to get everything done in 1 year?
And either of you two? Enrique?
So just kind of thinking back to a presentation that we had with Sam Oak a few sessions ago. There's 60 languages spoken within the community.
Yeah.
And as we think of engagement, community engagement, how do we increase engagement? I wonder if there's an opportunity here to make whatever the surveys look like, make them multilingual or partner with Studer to create or at least lessen barriers so that we can increase the community input so that we can get more voices represented.
Yeah, for sure. I know they do translate into Spanish, but that's another good question for Friday to see. I think there's extra charge for more languages, but definitely we want to be inclusive.
Yeah, so.
Just out of curiosity, did we include in the RFP the requirement for multiple languages, or was that not in there?
We did ask for it,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
Great, thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah, this is a little bit granular, but I'm just curious, when the surveys get done, the raw data, is that going to be all processed by them? They're going to be the ones handling everything and just giving us the results.
Well, we
Correct.
will be administering it, say, to students, staff, we'd be pushing it out, but, so we'll be, the way I'm looking at it, we'll be collectively working with them, on developing the survey, we'll be administering it, but yes, then they take the data and they analyze it.
They do the analysis.
And I'm sure Kristen will get all of those files for the raw data as well, in case there's any ways that we want to slice and dice it differently than what they're doing.
Sure.
But that'll be another good question we can learn more about.
Yeah. That question is coming really just from people who right or wrong, question what they see in results, because they just say if you're processing the data yourself, you're coming up with what you want yourself. I think
Yeah.
I'm encouraged that we will have that outside third party's eyes analyzing that.
Yep, unbiased, yep.
All right, thank you, and I'll just add my comments to build on what Stacy said. I appreciate that we've been consistent in gathering data from stakeholders at different levels throughout the years, and it sounds like this will up-level us one step and take it a little bit further. Where can we keep, instead of just setting that comparable data on a shelf, not that that's what we do, but we can go even further and really say, what does that tell us about next steps? So thank you for the time that the committee's put in on this.
And I think that piece, sorry, I just want to add one more thing. I think that piece about the having the comparable data is, so we know, well, what does 72% really mean? Like looking at other districts, that could be a really high number or it could be a really low number. So, because we've always with ours just looked at that, well, 100%, like that's what you're shooting for and everything. And then we have something that's an 84% and we're like, oh, it's not in the 90s. But maybe in comparison to others, that's a really high score. So I think that's going to help us as well.
And I appreciate you taking the question back too about languages and ways to involve the many different stakeholders in our community. So, all right, thank you so much.
Thanks, Christy.
All right, we're going to move on to the 2022-23 budget parameter discussion, and Executive Director of Business Services, Julie Sink.
Good evening, Board Chair Nelson and Dr. Stallo, board members. Tonight is the start of our budget process. I shouldn't say it's a start because we've been working on it for a few months now as well. Some of the things that we're bringing forward, we've already had discussions on. But this typically is where we start working on the budget and really digging in for next year. Of course, everything that we're doing with our budget is based on our mission and our framework for the future. And so those strategic directions that require some additional funding or resources, we're always looking at that, at this framework to make those budget decisions. I'm talking about enrollment. As we know, enrollment drives the majority of our revenue in our district. This is our 5-year enrollment trend. You have seen this several times, and so I just want to bring it forward. We started the enrollment process for next year's kindergarten students at this time a couple weeks ago. We're about exactly where we were at this time last year. We have about 269 students enrolled. We had 267 last year, so we're really close to where we had for enrollment for kindergarten. So we're on track that way. So far, so good. We're continuing to look at all of our grade levels. In February is really when we get a lot of our secondary enrollment information. They're registering our students. They're registering students from other areas outside of our district that may come to school here, like St. Mike's or Aspen, that they come in 9th grade. And so we're registering that. We should have better data for that information sometime in March when we have compiled all the data for those registrations. So we continue, and we've started working on that. As you know, we have an online enrollment process so parents can be online. We also have an open enrollment process and Loyola Del Lago enrollment process for our kindergarten students to make sure that we have sufficient room for anyone who wants to participate and enroll at Loyola Del Lago. If you have any questions about this data, please let me know, but otherwise this is pretty much what you've seen in the past. You can see that due to COVID, we have lost some of our resident students. Really, that, if we get them back, really will depend, I believe, on what happens in the future with that pandemic. It's hard to know when it changes daily. These are the enrollment projections that we had brought forward a couple months ago. I think these still hold true for the future. At this point, we've been looking at new housing developments. We have looked at the effect of COVID definitely on our district. And so What we're looking at is about 70 additional students for next year. And that definitely is lower than we projected in the past. And so we are looking at a slowing growth. We're still growing, but it's at a slower pace than it has been in the past. Summer revenues, updates for next year, or changes to our revenue. We do know that the legislature has approved 2% on the basic formula for FY '23. That's about $1.3 million of new revenue. You have to remember, and I say this time and time again, the basic formula for the district is about 60% of our total funding. So 2% on $60 million in essence, you know, $1.3 million. So we're really close to that. It certainly isn't 2% on all of our revenue, and so we have to just keep that in mind. We do get additional revenue for additional students, and so we're anticipating 70 additional students. This is very preliminary, so I'm just giving you some raw data right now, but about $700,000 for those 70 students. Special ed, we do know that we get an inflationary factor for special ed. That's about $400,000. And then we do anticipate utilizing some of our COVID funding that we have received to offset expenditures next year in the amount of about $1.06 million. So those are the areas of revenue that we do know that we are looking at for next year. Earlier tonight, you did have a legislative session where you talked to our legislators. We really didn't have much of a chance to talk about funding, but the two things that are still out on the table that we just don't know where it's going to end up is the state budget surplus. Will school districts receive any additional funding for next year? And there is some COVID funding that's still out there. Either it's leftover, that's unused, or they reallocate it to schools, and there's some additional COVID funding. So will we get any? As you know, in the past, our COVID funding has been based on our numbers of children that qualify for Title I funding, which is the same numbers that qualify for free and reduced lunch. So we get very little of those COVID funds compared to districts that have higher numbers. As we look at even this year, our numbers of free and reduced have gone down. And then why is that? Because our students are receiving free lunch, K-8, so they don't have to apply. And so it's hard to get our families to apply for free and reduced lunch, so that's but then again, of course, we lose funding, we lose compensatory revenue, we lose title revenue. And so it's really important to continue to have those parents apply for that free and reduced, even though they're getting free lunch this year from the federal government, K-8. Expenditure assumptions or needs that the district has talked about. These are still some just things that you need to be aware of that are on the table. We take a 4-year average of salary and benefit increases and apply that to our budget. Transportation, I've said this will be about a 6% increase. It's higher than normal, but I definitely know that we are struggling trying to find bus drivers. Many of our bus drivers are being stolen, I'll say, because it's difficult to provide those bonuses and those kinds of things that other companies are able to do. So we are looking at that increased cost. We do not, you heard it tonight again, the inflation factor and that effect on schools and fuel, gas, utility costs. Increased cost of online curriculum. We definitely know that we have a need for online curriculum. And as we move forward, what are those costs and how can we maintain those within our budget? We certainly haven't, we don't have the funding at this point and haven't had the expenditure funding for that type of expense. It has really increased exponentially. Our increased cost of supplies, materials, and paper. We certainly can't find toner right now, and so we are struggling with that, but we also quickly just ordered paper again because they actually called us and said, we have some, and we ordered it, and we are going to receive it. That's been a struggle for us as well. Possible additional EL staffing, we are discussing that. We know that there's some increased property liability, workers' comp, and cyber insurance costs that we will have. The district does have the maximum amount of cyber insurance that we currently can get. We've talked about this in the past, but I don't know if that's even sufficient if we were to have a major break in fraud into our district. Technology, we definitely know that we have insufficient technology for any kind of distance learning in the future, so we're really looking at ways to fund that. And the assumption that the district will fill all its open positions. As you know, currently we haven't been filling our current positions, and we haven't all year long. And so we will see a savings in this year's budget because we haven't filled those positions, but it certainly has and does affect the education of our students when we don't have that staff in our buildings helping our students in that, in the educational field. Some 21-22 COVID expenditures. This is the reason I'm saying that COVID dollars have been used for these, and we're intending to try to utilize that again. Our Laker Online, our online program, has utilized about $575,000 of COVID funding. If we continue to offer Laker Online next year, we need to utilize or find some funding for that. I mentioned earlier we do have a little over $1 million in COVID funding that we reserve, so if we could use some of that possibly. We also have that we utilized to help us offset some budget reductions last year in guidance counselors, about $700,000. And so we would, obviously those two items together are more than what we have in COVID funding, but we would certainly maximize that to the best of our ability. And again, we utilized about $200,000 in online curriculum out of COVID funds that we would need, and I expect that we'll have at least that in additional expenditures over and above our regular budget. This is last year, or the current year, I should say now. I'm already into next year, so I'm considering this year. But the current year, this is where we receive our funding. As you can see, the majority of that is state at $74 million, but this is all state funding as far as it's more than the basic revenue. We get about $5 million in federal funding, and that includes that COVID revenue that we've received. Normally, it's a little over $1 million. Special education is $11 million. You'll see in the future slides that we spend much more than that on special ed expenditures. And then we do have a local of about $20 million. Here's our expenditures by program. You can see our largest is just regular elementary and secondary instruction, but we also have a big portion that is federal and state special education. And vocational instruction is a very small slice of that pie, but our instructional support services, pupil support services, and district support, a small portion of that is insurance and administration, and then, of course, our operations, sites, and buildings. I always bring up our purchase services because I think there's some misnomer out in our community that we have all of these consultants that certainly help us with our work. We certainly do have some consultants, but the majority of that is items like transportation. We do work with a company outside of our district for substitute teachers, so that's another big portion of that pie. But we do have costs, education to other districts, that's another special services, leases. We have communication costs, postage, utilities, of course, and our insurance, repairs and maintenance. You can see that it's a wide variety of things that we use our purchase services for. This is our state, not our federal, it's our state-only special ed expenditures, and you can see what that is, almost $17 million. And so you can see that's much higher than what we were receiving in revenue. And this is that difference is what they consider the cross-subsidy. And so when that's the amount that the general fund is paying to support our special education services. And so when we asked our legislators, can they please fully fund the cross-subsidy, we're asking for this $6.5 million that we're not receiving in funding for them for special education. And I know later on in the agenda, there's some additional requests that you're going to make of the legislators. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about this cross-subsidy. And this is just last year's general fund budget. You can see our revenues are a total of $110.5 million, and our expenses are $112.7. We know that we're spending more than we're receiving. A lot of that has to do with the COVID funding as well. But we continue to have higher expenditures. And I just don't see with the inflation rate that we're at this point that that's not going to continue. So we certainly are looking for additional funding from the state to help us with that, that increase in inflation. And then all our other funds, and you can see what those are as well. And we're working with our food service and our community education partners to make sure that we're continuing with their budgets as well. And we'll work through those other budgets as we work through this process. Any questions about the information I provided tonight?
Questions or comments?
What?
Stacy?
I was just gonna say that we reviewed this at FLRP last week, so three of us were here to kind of go over the assumptions and that kind of thing, so we talked about that. You know, I just wanted to review one thing on the cross-subsidy. So when you went back and talked about the number, was it federal and state initially that you said?
Yes.
And that was what, 19 or 18 million?
For expenses or revenue?
Revenue, I think that was first. right?
Revenue was 11 million in state. We only get about, in special ed funding
Yeah.
from the federal government, just a little over $1 million.
Okay, because I noticed it was federal and state on one side, but only state on the other, so when we address it with legislatures, we're just talking about the state.
Right, you're just talking about the state portion of it.
$6.5
State
million.
special ed at this is 11,064.
Okay. I just wanted to make that clarification. And then, well, sorry, and one other thing. On COVID expenditures, I just wanted to reiterate this too, to make sure I heard correctly. So the guidance counselors, the cost for $683,000, that's an offset. It's not like we went out and hired $683,000 worth of new counselors for COVID. with
Right,
COVID
it's an
relief.
offset. We utilize that funding to help us sustain our budget and to continue to,
Right, but when,
it's not additional
right, but when COVID
counselors.
funding's over, they have to go back into the general fund,
Right,
so.
that funding will have to come out of the general fund. That is
But we're
correct.
anticipating next year that we can use the COVID dollars for this, and then not offset it again, and then the following year they'll
The
have to go
following
back,
year will be,
they'll go back into general.
right.
Okay. Okay, that's it for me.
You know, one of the things that I didn't ask when we were in the FLRP, as well as we had just realized, did we continue the Safe Schools levy going into the next couple of years? So at the exact same amount, right?
Right, it's limited by what you have, your student population.
Right.
So it's X amount of money per student for the Safe Schools levy, and yes, it was part of our levy certification in the fall.
Okay. I thought so. I just don't remember us actually specifically making sure that that was already stated in there, and that remained fairly consistent, obviously, by
It's
population.
about 380, I want to say it's about $380,000.
But it was pretty much a wash. I mean,
Right,
compared
there's
to what
not a
we got,
lot
yeah.
of movement in that.
And then the other thing is when we talk about the cross-subsidy, we're talking on net amount here, but it's also per student, right? Or can we, or would we be able to tell our legislators that this is, obviously, to support SPED costs more per student than what we're receiving, in addition to the per student funding, et cetera. But would we be able to give them, for the numbers of students, this is the amount that it actually costs on average per student, so we could be a little bit more discreet in our ask? So in other words.
Per special ed student or per
Right.
total student?
No, for special ed. Because obviously it costs more per student, so I'm just kind of curious about the net difference, so we can be a little bit more specific on our ask.
We certainly could give you the total number of special ed students. That includes all of the tuition agreements that we have inside and outside of our district. So it'd be including more than just our students that we're educating.
We usually say that cross-subsidy, the 6 million,
It's-
is a little, maybe a little more, a little less than that, is it?
It's a little more than that.
Yeah.
But per student, I don't know the number of special ed students off the top of my head, but we would have to determine what that is, that total cost is per student. The issue isn't really the special ed students, it's the cost of our regular general population. That's really the ones that, in essence, are losing because they're not able to, we're not able to provide $6.5 million of education to them. Because we're required by the IDEA to provide those special education services to those students.
Right.
There isn't that same requirement to our regular ed students. And so that's why we have to utilize that funding for that purpose.
I understand it comes out of the general fund, moves over into that, and I was just gonna say, if we were gonna make a separate fund for that, and that's been historically underfunded since it got passed, or not funded at all, I don't think, at first when it got passed. But if we were to put a number on it and try to segment that amount, it would be helpful to say, on a formula basis, for a special ed student, this is the extra that would be needed. And then my last question is you kind of touched on it, but right now we are getting funding for lunch for certain populations still going into this year. Do you know what the impact of that's going to be next year if we're not able to provide those free lunches and the cost of food and supplies in our supply chain continues the way it is?
Are you asking me if we're going to have an increase in our food service prices?
Yeah, kind of. Indirectly, yes, without scaring anybody, because it hasn't.
We're
been
working
lost
on that
us.
right now.
Okay.
I think we're waiting to hear what the results will be from the federal government, if they're going to continue to fund that or not. We certainly are seeing an increase in costs, not only our food costs, but also all of our other costs for our child nutrition services. So plates and cups and all of that. It's all, and the supply chain isn't certainly there, so we're having to purchase things that we haven't in the past or from different vendors, so make sure that we have the supplies that we need. We're certainly working on that. I really couldn't give you an answer to that right now. We're still looking at all of those costs and what they've been for the current year and trying to project that forward and how many students, and that participation rate, there's a plus and a minus. Once you increase costs, will they serve less students?
Right.
So we look at that balance as well. So I couldn't really answer that question tonight, but we're certainly looking at that and trying to do our due diligence in determining what that will be for the future.
Thanks.
Before we go on to other questions, I'll just point out too, in the resolution we'll be discussing later about IDEA, it does call out that even the amount assigned to the average, special ed student does not cover for many of our students who have exceptional needs or multiple needs. And so that is part of what we are advocating for when we get to that discussion later tonight. So thank you. Jonathan.
My question, Julie, is we do have, this isn't news, right, that we have budgeted for about $1 million of spend of the fund balance.
No, that's definitely not news.
Yep. So the 112 that you are showing as the estimated expenditures.
For the current year?
Yes.
Yes.
Does that reflect yet at this point any of the unfilled positions and the savings that we've had from there? So this is the budget, correct? This is
the budget, and we certainly know that we have some unfilled positions that we haven't filled all year, and we definitely won't end up spending all of this. The issue is if
We'd like to.
We'd like to, certainly, and we have a need, more than even liking to.
For sure.
The district certainly has a need for those positions, for the education of our students. And so I do believe that in the future, the board will want to look at that. If not, you would be looking at reducing those positions.
And And I don't think anybody wants to do that.
I don't believe that, but I do think that we will see some savings in that area similar to what we had last year.
Okay.
Can I just qualify that really quick? Our budget assumption going into these numbers here is that we will fulfill those. Just want to clarify.
That's on the list.
Right, okay.
So what does that leave our fund balance at then, given all of these
million less.
assumptions? For
For the
22?
current year,
Million.
The percentage, I think like the fund balance percentage.
this
Yeah.
piece, we're a little over, oh boy, I'd have to figure it out.
I mean, it's 14 on 1/12, so.
Yeah, I can do that too. Okay.
We're still within our range, though.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely at this point. It's 11.7, I want to say.
Okay.
Sorry, I kind
No,
of blanked
that's
out on that for a second.
Well, and I just kind of,
Moving target.
yeah,
Yes,
to piggyback on that a little bit, the assumption is that we fill all open positions, but we know, Jim, and I know I'm putting you on the spot here a little bit, you know, average this year, how many unfilled positions have we been having?
Now we have 63.
Has it ever not been double
That's the
digits?
highest we've had
Oh.
during the year. It's mostly in the 50s,
50s?
most of the time. Almost all of those are support staff. We do have some building teacher
Right. Well, and I think just ongoing, you know, and I know we're under work contracts and that kind of thing, but to make, I mean, there's obviously a labor shortage everywhere. We hear that when, like, Jimmy John's is giving like $1,000 signing bonus to the delivery driver. I mean, there's a lot of people that are trying to get people.
absolutely.
And there's a lot of incentives, so to make ourselves competitive, I think that's something, you know, obviously that's gonna add to our costs, but that is something that I think, you know, the hope of filling open positions, it might be hard with what we're offering right now. You know what I mean? And people are finding obviously other things in the marketplace, so,
I think that's the same thing I was trying to say with the transportation as well.
Right.
They're able to take the
Right.
staff when they can offer those bonuses. It's very attractive.
right. It's just, you know, I mean, I don't think people know, but like, you know, the high school kitchen has been basically operating with 10 or more people less every single day, serving 3,000 lunches all year long.
That's correct.
So it's terribly taxing on our employees, and I think, you know, moving forward, we're gonna have to try to figure out, I mean, yeah, we're gonna need to spend this money if we wanna keep the employees that we do have, because they need support. So, I'm just putting that out there as, you know, I think I think I've heard that from everyone's lips on the board, but to make sure that the public hears that, you know, it's not unique to schools. I mean, it's not unique to us. It's happening in all the schools and it's happening everywhere, but to really keep our schools functioning as to how they should be and how kids should be getting an education every day, we really need to start to make sure that our, you know, jobs are attractive to people, and we're gonna have to obviously do some changes to do that, so, which will cost more money.
I don't disagree.
Yeah, I know, I know, you know.
Were there other comments or questions?
I just like the $1,000 bonus for Jimmy John's.
There you go.
It's kind of attractive.
I know where I'm going after this.
I just saw it on the wall, that's why I said, when I drove by.
And thank you for taking the time to break down the different things. I think for anybody listening from the public, one thing that I've learned in particular through some of our COVID staffing challenges is that there is a perception, and I don't know why there wouldn't be, that all school districts are created equal in terms of their funding, their depth of their staffing, et cetera, from the general public. And it is just a complex beast to figure out school finance. I would not want your job for anything. And there are so many different factors that affect what a district has for resources and how it can allocate them. And so while the district down the street may be able to do X, Y, Z, they might be dealing with a very different slate of issues and resources than we are in our district. So I want to thank you for being thorough and for all of the questions that help point out where some of those discrepancies are between districts. So thank you. Are we comfortable as a board then with where we're at with assumptions and parameters moving forward?
Yeah,
All
thank
right.
you.
Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. We have Paraprofessional Recognition Week proclamation. I'm going to take a moment to read this recognition, and just speaking about shortages and challenges with staffing, special call out as we do this to keep in mind our paraprofessionals who are just critical to the work that we do and so taxed, especially recently. This is a State of Minnesota proclamation. Whereas Minnesota is home to more than 20,000 paraprofessionals providing services in multiple settings within schools, including support for instruction, student activities, and individual students, as well as numerous other tasks that contribute to educational success. And whereas the support and services provided by paraprofessionals are integral to student achievement, resulting in even better, more effective Minnesota schools, and whereas the state of Minnesota and the Minnesota Department of Education are committed to excellence in education and recognize the important role that paraprofessionals play in ensuring educational success, and whereas the Minnesota Department of Education will celebrate the contributions of paraprofessionals during Paraprofessional Recognition Week from January 24th through January 30th, 2022. Now therefore, I, Tim Walz, Governor of Minnesota, do hereby proclaim the week of January 24th through 30th, 2022 as Paraprofessional Recognition Week. And in the state of Minnesota and in Prior Lake Savage area schools, we recognize and honor those who provide these services and supports to our student. So if you know a paraprofessional or if you are served in your family by one, please extend your gratitude this week. Next, we are going to discuss briefly the IDEA resolution that was in your board packet. And Enrique, did you want to take a minute to kind of just introduce it to the group? Of course, very timely that it followed the discussion that we just had.
Absolutely. So this is something that we discussed as part of the Minnesota School Board Association Delegate Assembly. It came forward, 1974, 75, quite some time ago, as an agreement from the federal government to fund special education or to contribute towards funding of special education, because we recognize that that's important. We want to educate all learners to their fullest capability. And we recognize that as legislators, as legislative bodies, that's not happening. We see that in the current environment, there's momentum shifting. We see that there's a surplus, and the momentum and the time is now. So our MSBA governing board, they asked that we move this forward, and they asked that all of the MSBA delegates, that they move this forward and move a resolution forward, move a proclamation forward, supporting this, asking legislators to apply pressure to our legislators to ask that this be fulfilled.
We will be bringing this forward to a vote at the February 7th meeting. Any questions or comments about it?
I just want to add that this has been a priority on every single legislative request that we've had since the beginning. It's been a priority since before I got on the board, which is almost 6 years ago. This is the one constant. If we get one thing out of both federal and state, this would be the one thing that we should absolutely fight like crazy for. It just gets worse every single year.
Thank you. All right, if no other questions, we will be bringing that forward for a vote and then be forwarding it on to MSBA, where they will be collectively submitting from all the different districts their commitment to this resolution. All right, moving on now to board governance and policy. We have two policies up tonight that are at a first read level. First, we have policy 721, uniform guidance policy, and we'll ask Julie to come or to just introduce it from her chair, please. Thank you.
This is a policy concerning the uniform, or any federal purchasing is really what this entails. We've had this policy for quite a long time, but we do need to update it, and it's on the 4th or 5th page. There is a reimbursement-based payments policy addition for pre-claim procedures, our submission procedures and the claim receipt procedures that is recommended by our auditors to include this in this policy. So we're bringing that as an addition. Otherwise, the remainder of the policy stays the same.
Any questions at this point or comments on the changes made to the policy?
This is the first reading of that.
This is just the first reading, correct?
Share this, my
Yep.
MacBook will not power up.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing it forward after hearing the couple reports from the auditor as well. Thanks for your work on that. Next is first read of Policy 213, School Board Committees. Dr. Stallo, I believe you're presenting that?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Nelson. When we were going through the process at the organizational committee meeting, or meeting where we looked at committee structures, there were a couple changes that we wanted to make to that form, kind of some slight changes, and in addition, recognizing that if we made that on those committee lists, we also had to change the policy with which they're also written in. So if you take a look at that, the two changes, under Public Engagement and Legislative Committee, we had called out a framework that years ago we were introduced to when we were working with a group, and that framework isn't one that we use universally. So we decided to remove that because we think it's confusing to our community members if we're not using the framework to have it in that policy. Also, we had listed the Director of Communications on that, and while Christy certainly plays a role, as does Julie and Jim and many administrators. So instead of just calling out one, we know that's a collaborative process, so we are removing her from that. Additionally, when you look at the district-wide advisory council representatives, we have added, and we must have added the Finance Advisory Council last year around, knowing that that was our goal and we were going to do it because that was in there. But as you recall, Sam Oak has also added the Educational Equity and Excellence Advisory Council. So we'll want to be sure that that got changed into the policy, and we do have a representative on that per the organizational meeting. And I think those are the only changes that we'll bring forward on those.
Okay, great. Thank you for that, and those will come forward for a few more readings before they officially are approved tonight. Oh, Mary, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that when I, 6-7 years ago, when I first started with board work and stuff like that, we used to have a couple of other committees. One was a Policy and Procedure Committee, another one was a Technology Committee. Given the state of where we are with, what happened with the tech levy and all that, should we also maybe consider, reinstituting the Technology Committee? And maybe even a separate Policy and Procedure Committee to review these independently or anything like that?
Wasn't policy brought to the full board? It used to be in a subcommittee,
right.
and we decided it was worth correct me if
Yeah.
I'm wrong with the
Committee of
history,
the
but that it
whole.
was the work of the entire board.
Right, I mean, that's one of our main roles is policymaking, and so, I think when we had it as a small group, it was, just a couple voices and the superintendent, and other board members felt like they wanted more kind of conversation around it, so this is much more conversational, I'd say, and I think everyone's represented, so, policy of the whole is kind of what we've done for the last, I don't know, I think since you guys have been on the, I don't-
Yeah.
So it seems to be working. I think the other way was, and especially when you're a new board member, I happen to be a new board member that got placed on that committee, but it was a really great way to be able to hear from everybody and to really learn the district. And when you're new and you can hear from all the different groups, I think having them come forward with policies is much more transparent, and it gets the voices of all of us. And the way that we've done the readings, it's like almost twice the amount of readings that we used to do. So even for public, knowledge and to hear the discussion, it's much more transparent. So I wouldn't recommend that. I think the way that this works is much more transparent, open, and all voices are represented. So that's just my 2 cents. But
What about the Technology Committee?
I think, what in relation would you want to talk
I
about
didn't even
technology?
understand why it got eliminated all of a sudden, so
I don't even
didn't-
remember technology
Yeah,
committee, to be
they
quite
used
honest.
to be,
I can't. Does anybody recall one?
yeah.
I don't.
I actually attended it.
Well, was it one member,
No, it was Dr. Stoller, you were in it, and a few other people were in it. I don't really remember all the details of it, but it was quite some time
We
ago.
had one quite a long time ago when we were first bringing forward, how, you know,
The
Devices.
one-to-one
devices.
and all that kind of stuff.
Well,
and
we
spend.
only became one-to-one when COVID pandemic hit.
Right, or,
Well,
yeah, with the,
What the,
Then it was how to implement it
yeah, high school.
throughout the district. And it, once the board made a decision about what they were planning to do, I think that kind of went away.
I think it was like for that purpose.
Not a standing committee.
Yeah, because I don't recall that, and that decision was made before I came.
That
and
was
I-
before you came.
Yeah, I
That
don't
was
recall
before you
being
were on
on
the board,
that.
too.
Actually, I was called in to speak at it about the mobile device and a few other things, and I know you were on it, because that's when I first met you.
No,
but-
I wasn't on that meeting. That was a separate side meeting that we were, I mean, that was just a,
In
Okay.
the conference,
person
in
coming
that
in.
conference, in the superintendent conference room, yeah, that
Yeah.
wasn't a technology
that wasn't a
committee.
technology meeting at all.
It was introduced as one, but anyways.
Nope, that
the
wasn't a
other question that I
technology
have-
committee.
Yeah, the other question that I have is, in this policy, it states that the study session will discuss the committees and all that kind of stuff. And I don't, it in there, it says
Where
that,
specifically are you?
it talks about, like, sorry, for some reason my laptop won't charge. It talks about the discussion of the committees in a study session. And I just, if you go back up, it's in there somewhere. And I know it used to be in there, and I swear I read it before, so I highlighted it. I'm just wondering if when we do discuss the committees and things like that at the beginning of each year and who's on it, if we, you know, when we have our organizational meeting, if we actually use the next study session to discuss the purpose of each committee and who's on it, so that not only for the public, but for us.
Possibly in a school board work session.
Yeah, possibly at a school board, but, yeah. Is that something that we should maybe make a little bit, you know?
Well, I mean, I will say this, I remember, I mean, because I've done this 11 years now, and it's always stated, if anyone has any feedback or anything for the outgoing chair about your committees or anything you want to let the person know, and, you know, can discuss, and then that chair kind of does the initial, okay, this is what I think. And then it sits here, and it's up to the new chair, once the new chair gets it, to whether or not that goes forward. I'll say I didn't get one single comment from anyone about anything different. So, and haven't the years I've been chair. So I don't see it as a huge, big thing. I think if someone really says, I want to be on a certain committee and this is why, I mean, people would say, oh, okay, well, then someone else has to come off. And you can have an open discussion on that in a study session. It doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's still up to the chair.
Well, the thing is that when we have a change in board members, and they're starting in January, and the discussion happens over email even before their first time on the board, that maybe that would be helpful during the,
Well, and I think new members is one thing. I also know that there's concern because that pushes back everybody's, I mean, January, the schedules get set like July, really, because that's when the new year starts. And so it pushes people out, and a lot of times we have stuff timely for the study session that needs to come forward. So that can be an issue. I don't see it being a big issue.
I will say that I do believe in my onboarding process as a new school board member prior to serving for the first time in January, the committee structure was introduced and we had an opportunity to express interest to the board chair. And as I recall, both you and Lee the last few years, as we come to the end of December, have asked for the board to give input if they feel strongly about it. So in terms of assigning members, I think we have that opportunity, both whether as a new board member or a current board member to do that. If you're talking maybe a little bit more about explaining to the community what each board does.
it's actually both.
Yeah, so I don't know if people are interested in that, or if maybe when committees give their reports, you know, they can just kind of always say, you know, I'm a member of the Public Engagement and Legislative Committee in this role. It is our job to boom, 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 which we kind of do like when we introduce the platform or bring forward an engagement issues such as when we did the stakeholder engagement. So I guess I would look for more input if there's something in addition to that that we need to do in terms of informing the community or in gathering input. Any other board direction on that?
I see the idea behind
Yeah.
having some discussion of them at a study session. I could potentially see somehow a short discussion, and the rub is when we do have new members come on,
Right.
the timing is virtually impossible to do that in a way that would help them. But I think for the purpose of the public, if at the time in November, December, when we have if there's a study session and the chair's talking about
Yeah.
Yep.
what's going to happen next year in the transition and where do you want to be, I think that would be an appropriate moment to maybe perhaps elaborate a little bit about what the role is of each committee and what's happening. If we have newly elected members, and I do also remember during our onboarding being informed about all the committees and what we'd be doing. I think we could be encouraging newly elected members to either attend or watch that or listen to that study session to hear that and become informed. And you would invite their input for what they'd like to be doing. I think there's a happy medium in there.
Yeah, I
somewhere.
mean, and the chair, reaches out, the current chair reaches out to the new board members. I did that when it was time and just say, hey, there's also a hierarchy to it. In the sense, you have current board members serving on ones that they want. New board member comes in, one committee's full. That's kind of, they want to serve there. They've been here longer. There is something to that. So yeah, I have had discussions at study sessions with previous boards. Nobody's sitting on this board right now, but I have had discussions about that. If it warrants that,
For the purpose of the policy,
I don't.
I think we're
for
fine.
me, I think we're fine. I don't know the policy
Yeah.
needs to be changed.
Well, because it says possibly study.
Yep.
Yeah, and
So
it's,
there's
their
room in there.
behalf,
Yeah.
Or if a board member wants to bring it up and talk about
Yeah.
it, they can.
I know I had the conversation in December and said, hey, is anybody,
Right,
nobody says nothing. So that's more or less what it is. So.
because we did talk about it as you
A
were
lot of other
preparing.
school boards actually leave it for the next study session, particularly when there's new members, so they can discuss it and talk about who's best for it and things like that. So it was just a thought, and we do have it in the policy that possibly in the study session, and, and I know since I've been on the board, that's never happened, so I thought I'd just bring it up.
Yep, I appreciate that, and also we can just be sure to remember to call and voice your opinions when they're asked for, and to share that so that the board is aware. I also know that Stacy's and Lee both have had to look at people's work schedules, what attendance records are like, who can be where at what times, in order to making those assignments as well. But I agree with you. I think the policy as stands allows us that flexibility to consider moving forward. So any other comments or questions on this?
I just need to go back to the technology committee, if there's any, again, I don't have a recollection since I've been here that there was a technology committee. Again, Mary, there was a meeting that I think I met you at about a policy related to technology, but I don't recall that there's been a technology committee since I've been here, and I think Julie spoke to that there was prior to the devices, but I just want to make sure if there's direction or not direction on adding that at this point. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. All right. There are no official first reading of policies. The two we just did were being presented. We have a full slate of second reading of policies, which means they have come to us several times in both public board meetings, business meetings, and study sessions. So if there are no other comments or questions on those, please be prepared to vote on those at the February 7th meeting. Any comments or questions before we move ahead? Okay. Next, we are going to go to superintendent relations.
I don't have anything. We did the mid-year. Thank you for that. I know now, I'm excited that kids are back in school. And again, I know we tried to minimize a lot of visitors, but if those of you, if we're meeting on weekly basis, if we want to meet in schools and, maybe not go in classrooms as much, but walk some halls and whatnot, I think we can safely do that. So let me know as you schedule those if there's particular sites you'd like to go to, so I can just let principals know that we'd be coming, but thank you.
That has been a nice change to kind of move those out of an office and be in the building, seeing what's happening as we build relationships, so thank you. On to informational items. The first is an update from the Finance, Facilities, and Long Range Planning Committee on the Finance Advisory Committee. I'm not sure who's taking that.
Yeah.
Julie is.
Started, yep.
Well, I'll start. I'm sure some board members will want to chime in. We did have a discussion at our last FLIRP meeting. We had over 25 applicants for the Finance Committee. A couple of the criteria that we were looking for were people that had some finance experience, and that may be in any kind of area, but also that they would be a resident of the district. So we did have some people that had applied that have students that are attending school here, but they don't reside in our district. So we did exclude those applicants from the pool. And so we're able to bring forth different groups, what we call groups of applicants. Either they had some leadership experience, either CFO or CEO of some organization. We had other accounting, CPAs, those type of people with that type of experience. We also had some people that had finance advisory experience. So we had a group of that, and we also had a group that really didn't have a lot of finance, or maybe not any finance. So we brought all of that forward to the committee, the FLIRP committee this last week. I don't know if you want to speak to.
No, I mean, I think it was a good group it was hard to pick. There were a lot of great, applications and resumes, and, so yeah, I think, I know we were aiming around 5 is what we talked about. We kind of pushed it a little, and, we're thinking a few more maybe, just because of the number of applicants. So
We also were looking for people with, not only with some experience, but with students in the district. So they had a vested interest, but we do have a couple also that the board looked at that had without students in the district as well.
Right. And I think, this was my first meeting, but I think the plan is for them 4 times a year, 4 times a year.
Looking at about 4 times a year, kind of really the first meeting will be just trying to understand and kind of going over the school finance, looking at different things as far as that goes. But in the future, really looking at, are there some special projects? Maybe it's a referendum, maybe it's if they have some advice for the district, or can help us look at things in a different way, or, but it's going to be the first couple meetings. We'll be looking at our current year budget and next year budget. Just trying to understand what we're trying to do and how enrollment plays a part in that, and the different funding sources. There's a lot to go over.
Yeah.
And we'll be taking some input from them as well as to what they'd like to see or hear, what they'd, more information they'd like to hear about as well.
And I think the plan process moving forward is to bring that roster forward of names for the February meeting.
Right, we will bring a list of names to the February board meeting. We're hoping to have our first meeting on, I believe, February 22nd. And we'll be sending out letters to those people who applied. Anyone who applied will receive an email from us, either thanking them for applying and hoping that they may look at the future again, because we definitely will have a rotation of people coming on to the committee and going off, and then asking those people who were selected if they would be still willing to serve.
Right.
And we are definitely looking at making sure that they adhere to all of our policies and procedures as we go through this process as well.
So, yeah, I think from our initial go through, I think we're hoping to have, 6, 7, something like that is probably what we'll, and then obviously Julie, myself as treasurer. Who else sits on the committee?
We're looking at
Staff-wise.
a few other staff members. The district controller will be at that meeting as well, and probably some
Yeah, so
other-
it'll be around 12 is what
Yeah.
we're thinking.
Mr. Quorum here will probably be on the committee as well.
Okay. So, yeah, so I think, pending board approval, it'll be one of those kind of pending board approval, but you'll see the roster of names come forward in the consent agenda, I think, in whenever the next meeting is, February,
It's similar to what we do for our other committees.
like curriculum and that kind of stuff. So.
Thank you for that and the work on that. I think that's great from two sides. One, that we get the expertise and advice from people outside of the district, and secondly, more community members become familiar with the complexities of school finance, and that will help go a long way. Another informational item, just a point of procedure to help me as chair as well, is just to review that if you are going to abstain from a vote, I know this came up last time, please be vocal in that abstention so that it can be recorded correctly. So if we are doing, ayes and nays, please just, if I call out a vote and say, that passes 6-0, and I didn't hear, or the public didn't hear an abstention, please do just vocalize that so we can get it documented correctly. I won't formally ask at each vote for that, so please just call my attention to it. All right, there were no requests for presenting at public forum tonight, and so I think at this point, we are going to be moving on to closed session. The closed session, the meeting will be closed in accordance with the open meeting law, Minnesota Statute 13D.03, for the purpose of discussing negotiation strategy. Do I need a motion to do that, or is that a request?
I could
for
give you a
one?
motion in case you do. Motion.
Okay, Stacy, second to go into closed session.
All those in favor say aye.
All in favor say aye. Opposed? All right,
I don't know if we need one.
we'll take about a 2-minute recess here, and then do closed session.
Break.
Go for it.